episode 396 of Retro Encounter, RPG Fan's weekly podcast of many topics, usually of the, retro variety. My name is Zach Wilkerson, and I will be your host today. Before I introduce our panelists, let's talk about what we're here to talk about today. We are going to be talking about Lunar, the Silver Star, in all its various iterations, at least 4, depending on how you're counting. But we'll get into that. But before we get into that, I'd love to introduce our panel, starting with you, Ben Love.
Hi, everybody.
And Noah.
Hello.
And Scott.
Hey, everybody. How you doing?
I'm good. And excited to talk to all of you. I'm sorry it's not about Eternal Blue, Scott, which I know is the greatest video game of all time.
It is the greatest video game of all time.
I love that's your opinion, because I love Eternal Blue. I actually
it's
think
okay,
I like...
but we're talking about the second best video game of all time.
That's fair. As I mentioned in our intro, we're going to be talking about Lunar, which there are a lot of reasons why we're talking about Lunar today. You might remember, if you've been a long-time listener, that way back in, I believe it was 2018, it was right before I joined the site, which I wasn't on those episodes, which is because that was right before I joined the site. We had a month of game journals about Lunar. We had 2 episodes about Lunar, the Silver Star story complete. And then we had 2 episodes about Lunar Eternal Blue. It was right around the time I was interviewing, they were coming out. I thought that was awesome. So today we're going to be talking about just Lunar, the Silver Star. But one of the reasons for that is that, as if you're a reader of the site, this is our 25th anniversary year. And we actually started as a website way back in the day as LunarNET, as a Lunar fan site. And then we got some great screenshots for Grandia, and we kind of expanded from there and then became RPGFan. And the original founder eventually spun back off into LunarNET. So you can still go find LunarNET on the internet. And Mickey does a great job of still managing that unfortunately dead series. But it's also the 30th anniversary this month of the release of the Silver Star on Sega CD in the United States of America. And so we thought it was a great time to talk about it. And so Jono and I had a conversation. This is a couple months ago. And I pitched to him, was like, hey, can I do a review of Lunar for the 25th anniversary? And then we realized it was an anniversary, and we came up with the idea of having 4 different reviews for the 4 different sort of major versions of Lunar. The Sega CD version, which I reviewed, the Silver Star Story Complete, which Scott reviewed, Lunar Legend, which I believe that was you, Ben, right, who reviewed Lunar Legend?
Mm-hmm.
And Noah reviewed the PSP version of Lunar, Silver Star Story. And so our conversation today is mostly going to be around sort of the differences between these 4 versions, our preferences, some of the changes, because it's a remarkably commonly remade game. I can't think of a game that has as many iterations on popular platforms, except for maybe Final Fantasy IV. So I think that's kind of awesome. So before we get into things, I want to talk about our history with Lunar, because I think that'll help frame our conversation. About our feelings on these games, and especially Silver Star Story, or the Silver Star, or whatever you want to call it. So we'll start with you, Scott. What's sort of your history with Lunar series, and what do you love about it?
So my history with the Lunar series is basically maybe about right around the time LunarNet came out, 98, around there. I was we'd gotten, you remember those PlayStation demo discs? Not the demo disc, but the ones that came with, I think it was PlayStation Magazine.
Oh, I remember. Oh yeah.
So the first time I knew about Lunar is I watched one of those, and on the demo disc wasn't actually a demo of the game. It was actually the boat song. The boat song played in its entirety, just the anime cutscene and everything like that. And I was like, what the hell is this? I had no clue what this was at this point. And I was like, damn, I gotta find out about this stuff. So I went to the internet, looked up Lunar, right? Found LunarNet, RPGFan right from there, everything else like that. And I was like, I gotta play this game. And when it came out, very expensive because it came in a huge box at the that it came out in. And I was like, I gotta play this. And I had no idea that it actually came out like 5 years prior to that on the Sega CD. So I learned a lot about Lunar at that time, and I really kind of fell in love with the series. And to this day, it's easily my favorite series of all time.
That's an excellent take. And I'll jump in only because my story is so similar to yours. So I've been a LunarNet or RPG fan reader since almost the beginning as well, and I also stumbled into it for similar reasons. I saw some preview for it in some magazine, and I was like, oh my goodness, like I've been playing RPGs for years. I was a back then it wasn't we weren't getting RPGs that we do now, where I just can't keep up. Um, and I started googling around, and I found LunarNet. I've been following it ever since, and I played Silver Star Story Complete first on the PlayStation, and then I was like obsessed with it. Like I played it like twice in a row, and I've never done that before. And I just adored it for its characters, and I was like, and I've said this before on this podcast, like it was like the video game that made me realize that what I cared about, at least at the time, this is maybe less true now, but was characters. Like, do you have great characters, great characterization? That's what I want. That's what I care about. It was what allowed me to see what mattered to me. And so I would have called the Silver Star Story Complete my favorite game for a long time. And then I I actually convinced my dad to like buy like a because I didn't have any money. I was like 14. Uh, I convinced my dad to like fix all these broken Sega CDs that I bought on the internet.
Wow, that's
Like
impressive.
to like take all these different pieces and parts of them and like make a working one so I could play Eternal Blue, and I did, and I loved it. And
That's the smart way to do that, actually.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it cost me like probably $40 total, and back then those things were expensive.
I remember waiting for Eternal Blue Complete on the RPGFan website. I used to refresh
Yeah.
it every day because
Oh,
the
yeah.
release date kept getting pushed back
Yep,
and
it
back
sure
and back
did.
back then.
And that was one of the reasons why I would got so impatient and I went and grabbed
There
a
you
Sega
go.
CD.
That was smart.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then I've played, I've played Eternal Blue Complete at this point, and I had sort of dabbled in the Silver Star, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit here. But I had never beaten it. I think I'd gotten like halfway through, and I just kept falling off of it. And that's the version that I've completed for today. But yeah, I Victor Ireland is way too much of a tease with his Lunar 3 stories, and I can't believe I don't have it yet, and it makes me very sad. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So what about you, Ben?
Yeah, so my actually first introduction to Lunar would have been the Retro Encounter podcast where they went over Lunar Silver Star Complete and Eternal Blue. Because I had a PlayStation as a kid, but I never had a memory card, so I didn't play any RPGs on the PS1.
Oh man,
Um,
that is unique.
Yeah. So, I didn't really get into, like, a lot of PlayStation RPGs until much later. So, I think I first played Lunar, I picked it up in a local shop when I was doing an internship in 20 the summer of 2018. And then I got Eternal Blue and played that as well. So it's only been a few years since I played it, but I really like the series. I'm also a big fan of the Grandia series, so yeah.
And what about you, Noah?
Yeah, so big shout out to cdromance.com, a very legal
Mm.
platform. uh, I discovered Lunar a few years ago when I was trying to play through some 1992 video games, which I used the handy dandy search tool there to find, um, and picked it up and I don't know, tried out the Sega CD version. And I was like, man, this is really cool. So I looked it up and I was like, oh my gosh, there's new versions of it. And then played through the PSP version to review on my blog, which I had just started at the time. So, yeah.
Cool. I think it's fun that Scott and I have like a very specific story of coming to it, and Ben and Noah have a sort of more recent look at it, which I think is great because sometimes I worry with Lunar that my love of it is driven by nostalgia,
Yes, mine too, I think.
and I think that's certainly part of it. But I've even though we've only posted, I think that I know my review is posted certainly, and we'll talk about the reactions to that. Um, but I think Scott's will post before this goes up, and I don't think Ben's and Noah's have gone up yet. But I've read through all of them because they're in the process of being proofed. And I think it was cool just to sort of see the different reactions that we had to these different versions of it. Like our scores were really wildly different for a game that we all like love,
Yeah.
and I think that was really cool. And I think that it also gets to like how important small decisions can be. And even though it's essentially the same game in a lot of ways, between all four versions, there are like some really critical differences between them. And I want that to kind of be the focus of our conversation today. But before we get to that, I want to make sure that everybody who's listening has at least a sort of an understanding of what the like Lunar the Silver Star or Silver Star Story Complete or whatever um, is. So it was originally released as an RPG on the Sega CD back in 1992, and as far as I'm aware, it's one of the first games that had anime cutscenes and voice acting, and that had a sort of a focus on character. And I think that they were starting to discover that in 1992, but they sort of leaned into that a lot more in some of the later versions. But to give you sort of a general overview of what the game is, so the game opens, and this is sort of generally true between the four versions, as far as I'm aware. And please correct me if I'm wrong as we're having these conversations. Um, it opens in the town of Berg, and you are playing as Alex. And in the Silver Star, at least, he's a silent protagonist. He's only a little more chatty in at least Silver Star Story Complete. And he is like sort of visiting the grave of his hero, Dragon Master Dine, who was this great hero who had died before he was born, or at least he thinks so. Spoiler alert: we're going to be spoiling these games, so if you haven't played them, maybe
I mean, you
maybe
should have already.
consider going to play them before you listen to this. But he thinks he's dead, and he wants to be an adventurer. And so his friend Ramus approaches him, and he's like, "Hey, let's go to the White Dragon Cave, and let's go get like a White Dragon diamond," which is, as I think Noah points out in his review, is what
It's poo.
It's poop.
it's poo. And when he approaches him, and he's there with his friend Luna, who's like his adopted sister and also kind of his love interest, which is weird, but whatever, we'll let it go. I've read Wuthering Heights. And he eventually decides to go on an adventure, and then you sort of make your way throughout the world. You meet one of the other three great heroes. Galleon's one of the main ones, and I think Galleon's motivation changes between some of these versions are really fascinating and really interesting. And then eventually Galleon betrays you, and he's trying to take over the world. And then eventually you collect your group of people, and you have to take down Galleon. All while it turns out that, and again, spoiler alert, please, your friend Luna is, or your girlfriend or your sister or whatever, is also Althena, who's like sort of the goddess of the world, who you sort of learn more about in Eternal Blue. Moved humanity over to the moon, basically from Earth. Whatever. That part's not important, but it's all very Saturday morning cartoon. It's all very simple storytelling. There's not a lot of complexity in terms of the storytelling in these games, but it captures a particular feel. You want to like cozy up on a Saturday morning and pick up your blanket and play these games and just get wrapped up in the characters and get wrapped up in the great dialogue and the great characterization here. So I guess before we start moving on to the changes, what is it about the Silver Star Story or Complete or whatever you want to call it? What is it about these games that you really like? Who are some favorite characters? What are some story beats that you really like? What are some things that strike you about this game?
I think the thing that strikes me the most about this game was probably one of the first games that like I really felt did this really well was the characters interact with not just themselves and obviously the plot of the story, but like everything else in the universe, in the world, in the game. They talk to NPCs, and after the NPC talks, they talk to themselves, right? It feels like they're kind of having a conversation, like almost every time they talk instead of like random NPC says, this person's here or that
Yeah.
person's there, right? No, then the characters go, well, maybe that's not supposed to be that way, or that one's supposed to be that way. It's really interesting, and I don't think at that time there were many. I don't think there was any RPGs, well, outside of maybe some Western RPGs, obviously,
Mhm.
that ever really had that interaction between the party and the world itself.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing to point out. Yeah, I mean, I think that the NPC dialogue, um, especially I think in some of the later versions, is just remarkable in terms of how alive it makes the world feel. And I feel like the Trails series doesn't really exist, right, without
Yeah,
what Lunar is doing. And yeah, I think that's a great thing to point out.
I always like to joke and say the Trail's the spiritual successor to Lunar series since we're never getting Lunar 3. Oh, no, you
um,
know what? No, one day, it'll happen.
one day, we'll see.
I feel like almost every RPG these days is kind of a spiritual successor to this because it had the FMV cutscenes and had the anime adjacent aesthetic, the fleshed out world, the overpowering charm. Uh, so in a sense, I feel like a lot of these newer sort of series is a lot to Lunar.
I could totally agree with that. I feel like every time a new RPG comes out, I feel like, especially like I would say like the last one I kind of felt was really like that was like Xenoblade 3 was like felt the same way when you talk to everybody. It feels like they're actually having a conversation with everybody and not just themselves. And I'm happy to see that now. I'm happy to see more games do that. I agree.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair thing to point out. I mean, I think that and we'll get more into this, but I when I was reviewing the Silver Star, I gave it a 75, and we actually got an email recently of someone saying that I needed counseling because I gave it a 75. It's a true story.
The
And
internet, the boys and girls, the internet.
and then I wasn't old enough to understand, and I was like, "Look, I was 8 when this game came out. Like, I promise I'm old enough to understand." I started with Dragon Warrior 2, so if I started with that, I'm okay. But I do think that there is something to like, and I think that the negative reaction to my 75, which we'll talk more about, um, I think gets to like the power of what it was doing originally, right? And I think you're right, Noah. Like when it came out, like it's doing things that nothing else was doing, even compared to other games that came out in 92, 93, 94, which was sort of a golden age of like the dawning of RPGs. But the interactions you have with the world are so unique and remarkable, even in the OG version, that I think it's important to point out that that is like, historically critically important. And when I was playing it, I was like, wow, this is amazing for a 92 RPG. It's not super fun, but it's amazing for a 92 RPG. And I think
I
it's
mean,
really
even the
important.
audio, if you think
Yeah.
about it, like
Oof.
there were two full Final Fantasies that came out after this that used the Super Nintendo's sound chip. So having that like high quality Sega CD audio
Oh,
is, oh
yeah.
man,
The
something
music is
else.
phenomenal. Yeah, it's
Oh yeah.
phenomenal.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, no arguments for me there.
I think too, so a lot of that is related to it coming out in the West and how that, there may have been more RPGs contemporary with the Lunar that had some more of those elements, but a lot of those were not coming over. And it's also, kind of the birth of like modern localization, I think, in a lot of ways. Despite people have a lot of gripes with working designs and Victor Ireland and his
Mhm.
style of localization, but I think like that original Lunar on the Sega CD is like so foundational for um the style that localization would take, and games that are a little more under the radar actually being brought over, and companies that are just focused around localizing having a place in the market to bring games to the West.
And I'm glad you brought up localization because that was sort of the first thing that I really wanted to talk about in terms of the differences in these versions. Because to sort of give like a broader view, in 1992, like our localizations, even like the Woolsey localizations of Final Fantasy VI or whatever, like they tended to be a lot more literal. And you will see even in 2023, there are huge like mostly 4chan communities of people who are like make it like the Japanese, and you made changes and screw you. And a lot of RPG fan alum like Stephen Meyerink and Derek Heemsbergen, they talk about these things. And I talk to Stephen kind of regularly, and how intense people are about this. And I think it's interesting because we have moved towards the literal in the way that it didn't work to something that is more organic. And some people will argue that in Silver Star, and then especially Silver Star Story Complete and Eternal Blue, complete on the PS1, that Working Designs took that concept of like, hey, let's make this game our own and like took it to like 13 when they should have taken it maybe to 7.
Mhm.
Um,
Well, they did. They always said their games went to 11. That was
right.
their. That was
Yeah,
their thing.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I personally, and I haven't played I haven't played much of Lunar Legend, and I've played none of the PSP version. But I personally, like, for me, like, I love the working designs localization. I see its cracks. I'm like, wow, this is like so over the top. But for me, like, it's part of the tone and the charm and like sort of the weirdness of this world and the peculiarity of the world. Like, to me, like, Lunar is not Lunar without that weirdness and like very particular localization. And while like making jokes about Monica Lewinsky might seem pretty dated in 2023, like, I'm still like, oh, look, this is its own thing. It's trying to be its own thing. It's trying to do something different. And for me, like, that's charming and I think it's fun and I think it works, but I think other people find it grating. So what are your thoughts? I know, especially those of you who have played Legend and then the PSP version, like, what are your thoughts on the working designs localization as opposed to the more modern ones? What are your feelings about it? What are some of your thoughts?
Yeah, so the Lunar Legend, the version I played, is the first one that was not localized by Working Designs. And I think that's very clearly felt when you play the game. Like the localization in Legend is just not up to the quality of the previous versions of Lunar. And it's not to say that it's horrible, or I mean, there's definitely worse examples on the Game Boy Advance, for example, like Tales of Fantasia.
No.
It's not nearly that bad, but it's just it doesn't have the level of personality that I think that the Working Designs localization of at least Complete, because that's the only other version of Lunar I've played, conveys. And even though you do have a lot of those pop culture references or other things that maybe are kind of ill fitting in the Working Designs localization, the level of personality in the prose and the dialogue, I think, is just so important to the identity of Lunar, and you lose a lot of that in Legend. Like Legend is very, I wouldn't say that it's a completely literal translation, but it is a lot closer to that. And it just, I mean, and it just didn't get the love and the extra editing pass, I think, that Working Designs really took a lot of pride in. You can complain about some of the creative choices that Working Designs would make in their localizations, but the actual quality and attention to detail in those localizations, I think, was really high. And Lunar Legend just kind of feels like any other lower budget Game Boy Advance RPG localization. And that is kind of a shame because that's such a big part of what makes Lunar special, is the characters and the writing.
I agree. I also think that it's, sort of a characteristic of a bygone era. You look back at the early 90s and, movements like the online movement to translate Final Fantasy V, which there's a really good episode of the Video Game History Hour about this. If you guys want to give that one a listen, subtle plug there, I guess. But anyway, this was just like a time when things didn't really get translated a lot, and so when they did, it was just like some guys who really liked role playing games and spoke Japanese. And I know Working Designs is a company, right? But it was a small effort at the time, and you can sort of tell it has a grassrootsness to it. It has a I don't know, like a book clubbiness to it, like it's just some people who are really passionate about things that just didn't get a lot of love by the greater community at the time, and things that are missed in sort of the large corporatization of um, video games of this sort of aesthetic that Lunar is in. Yeah, I don't know, it's just lost over time. So I like the charm. I mean, I mean, I am charmed by what it is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and I think it's they kind of struck the sweet spot between a lot of games were just being localized by, they would contract in many cases one person and they give them a few months to do the whole game. And yeah, like the Woolsey translations are really good. And there were some really good ones that came out of that, but there's also a lot of really bad translations that came out of that. And working designs is like more of an effort for a small team to like make their name on localizing and bringing games over to the West. And I think that they kind of really established that, and you see that with the original versions of Lunar on the Sega CD and the PS1. And I think too, Noah played the PSP version, and that was done by Xseed. I think of any company that exists today that kind of has that spirit of working designs, I feel like Xseed is the company that most embodies that. That's like smaller, but puts a lot of care and effort in their translation. So I don't know if that came across in the PSP version, but
Oh yeah, yeah. I think Xseed perfectly sort of captured the like silliness maybe of the working designs translations in just in the spots where it really needed to be. Um, yeah, I really enjoy the I don't know, just all of the writing in the PSP version generally, but I think Xseed did. I mean, I don't speak Japanese, so I can't perfectly answer this, but I think they did a great job.
I think when it comes to working designs, if they didn't do what they did back then, I think we'd all be sitting here and we wouldn't be talking about Lunar. That's just how it goes. I think their localization is what set Lunar apart from a lot of the RPGs at the time. Uh, and it shows. It shows that like there was a lot of love and focus into this. If you ever watch the making of CD with that comes with Lunar complete, they basically they talk about the localization, how sometimes the little translations, the joke that makes sense in Japanese just doesn't make sense in English. Just it doesn't happen, and you need to take that and change it. And honestly, yeah, some of those jokes that they changed them to are they don't hold up well that well, but some of them do. Some of them are really still funny, and some of them are kind of you know they're a product of the time. They're very as a '90s '80s kid. It's like I still laugh at a few of them. It's like yeah, okay, I remember that. And like honestly, if it wasn't for them, I don't think any of us would ever care about Lunar. And I think the rest of localization would be held back for a couple years, honestly, in my opinion, too, because you wouldn't have all these localization studios looking back at working design and saying, hey, they did it that way. Why don't we do it that way? They would do it too literal. And I think you see sometimes in a lot of these old retro RPGs, as I end up playing a lot of them on stream, is I go back to them and I realize some of these translations are incredibly literal and it's boring. They're
I mean that
incredibly boring
that
compared to what,
continues through even to like I don't know
yeah,
Final Fantasy VII,
yeah.
and which makes Final Fantasy VII even more opaque than it already was. So yeah, I think I agree with everything everybody said. What's funny is because I played sort of the OG, right? So like I played the Silver Star, and like you can certainly see the fingerprints of working designs starting to kind of move towards that, and I think that's important. And I'm guessing at the time it felt like a revelation. I don't know, like I think about other games that came out around the same time, like Earthbound comes out around the same time, and like that localization is brilliant too, in my opinion.
Yeah.
In the way that it plays around with it. It's very different in the way it localizes, but it's perfect, in my opinion, to the way that it's addressing the concepts that it's trying to do. And it's easy in that case, right? Like it's supposed to take place in America. But my point is that like it doesn't have the same kind of flavor, but you can see them beginning to play with it. And I do think that the reason that it was so popular, that this game that is essentially like bog standard boilerplate in so many ways, the thing that distinguishes it to me is that localization, and they lean so much harder into it in the PS1 versions. And there are times that it doesn't land. Like I just watched my wife play through Eternal Blue Complete. She had never played through it before, and they like drop the R word
Oh,
sometimes.
yeah.
Like there's some stuff in
It
there that I'm
happens
like,
it happens in Lunar Silver Star also.
yeah,
On
okay. So
completing it.
it's been a minute, but it's like I was like, all right, like some of this stuff doesn't age well at all. And you can definitely sense like I'm like, ooh, that's as the kids say, cringe, but like literally, like I mean, my whole body convulsed. But otherwise, like I at least appreciate that they tried, and so like to me, that's worth it to me. So, sort of speaking of some of the adjustments to it, we're talking about the four different versions. Like the story actually plays out like kind of pretty differently. between these four versions. Like if you go and you play like Lunar Eternal Blue or then Eternal Blue Complete, like those two versions have some like mild differences, but for the most part, like they are the same game.
Yeah, there's really no story differences between
Right.
those
Yeah.
two.
It's very, very minor. But here, like they're pretty significant. So like, and I can only speak to what I know, because I haven't played a Legend or the PSP version. But like, for example, like between the Silver Star and Silver Star Story Complete, like Galleon's motivations are actually vastly different. And the Silver Star, like he is actually just trying to get revenge for the way that the world treated Dine. And he's just like upset about that. And even though I think he kind of knows that Dine is still alive, so it's really weird. Like it doesn't make any sense. Like some of the later versions introduce some plot holes because of it. But like it's like what? I don't understand. But like other things make more sense. Like there's two phases in the Silver Star to his final fight, and then it explains why he has like that sort of like scaly like left side of his face in Eternal Blue, that they don't explain at all in the Silver Star. um but the most important thing, and I know Scott agrees with me on this, is that Luna like leaves you when you're on the boat to going to
Yes.
Merivia, and she doesn't get to do the boat song as a result, which I believe the boat song is in at least the PSP version, right? I'm not sure about Legend.
Yes, it is. Actually,
um
they changed it too.
Mhm.
yeah, so
Lyrics changed.
I'm curious. I'm not sure how much you guys know about some of the different changes and adjustments, but what some of your feelings are about the adjustments or changes that you saw. I know Legend like definitely is basically like a Cliff's Notes version, from my understanding. Um, what some of your opinions are about some of the adjustments or changes to the stories, and if you think anything is actually stronger in some of your versions.
For me personally, I played the PSP version only one time. I enjoyed it a lot. Actually, I think some of the PSP versions actually like kind of flesh out the whole world earlier, especially since there's an epilogue. Not epilogue. There's a prologue that starts with that one, which I think Noah could talk about more in detail because he's played it probably just recently compared to I have. Um, but I think the most important change, not just the Luna change, but also like Alex Alex and Luna are older in Silver Star Story Complete. They're actually like aged up a little bit. So instead of being like 14, 13 in the original Silver Star, they're like 15, 16, 17 in that version, which kind of it's not a big change, but you kind of get the idea that like Alex is his own character in this version compared to the Silver Star, where he basically is a silent protagonist, does all talks from you know that, and then it's like, but in this version, he's still really silent, but he talks when he needs to talk, and it kinda adds to his, like it kinda adds to that hero status. It's like, he doesn't need to be boisterous or loud or anything like that because he has all those characters to do that for him, right? So he's like the really silent person in the group, and then when he talks, he needs to talk, and he says things he needs to say, and it kinda adds to his character a lot, and I think those 2 changes, obviously the Luna Stain and Alex just being a different character, older, a little more mature, not being silent all the time, really adds a huge difference in how, he acts and how Luna acts with everybody else and how all the other characters act with Luna 'cause they never meet Luna in the other version, in the previous version. They only meet her after the fact.
Yeah, I'm wondering if part of the age up is has anything to do with the really cringe, like, girly pictures that you find in those games.
Oh, the
Um,
bromides, yeah.
yeah, not to throw shade on Lunar for well, maybe, to yeah, I don't know, call that out. Not my favorite thing about the Lunar series, but there's more good than strange. But I think the base no the biggest difference between Silver Star Story Complete and the other ones and the PSP one is that the PSP version is the best version, and sorry, it does have that prologue. That's I think the biggest thing here, and the prologue provides all the context you really need for um the like great heroes of the land
Yeah,
for this.
I want to slow down on that for a second because if I'm not mistaken, and again I haven't played it, but it's about like Dine and Galleon and Mel and all those people, right? What exactly
It
happens in the
is.
prologue?
Yes, yeah, it is about the four heroes or whatever, um, going to sort of strike down the great evil in the land, um, with the help of Luna's previous incarnation, I suppose you could call it, um, who is the goddess of the lunar world. And yeah, I mean it's an interesting prologue on its own. I really like that it lets you play the game so that you can sort of see how the mechanics work and there's no stakes. Um, but beyond that, it also like gives you this great lore building to start off the game with. It gives you this sense of predestiny, or maybe prophecy, that you're going to be fulfilling as the next Dine, the next Dragon Master of the world, um, which I think is important. I think it adds a lot to the game, not just in its tutorialness, um, its opaque tutorialness maybe, but also in the context of making this world. It's a little bit obtuse. I played the Sega CD version first, and it was a little bit difficult to understand what the main objective was going to be of in the game until well after you um, have the dragon give you his poop. Uh, so I think with that change in the PSP version, I think that's the main thing that makes it stand out. Outside of aesthetic differences, which each of these versions has big aesthetic differences. With the first one being a little bit, I don't know, blocky, maybe.
Brown is the word I would
Right.
use, but
Brown.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I think
Um,
it's interesting that you talk about like the way that it frames the narrative, because I think that is one of the things that is very 1992 about the Silver Star. It's like you're just like these people who are going out and you're just going to kind of figure out where you're going, and like you're just going to kind of fall into whatever happens. That's kind of what happens in the Silver Star, and a lot of the where you go next is opaque. And I definitely a couple times was like, where do I go next? I'm just going to pull up game facts because I don't have the patience for that anymore. And so yeah, I mean, I think part of it for me is like a lack of patience, but like I think that I could see how that would raise the stakes. And when I was a kid, I was like, oh my gosh, I must have a prequel with Dine and Galleon. I thought for like I wrote whole prequels out myself because I was that kind of kid. I
oh,
was
that's cool.
14, so that's more embarrassing than it should be. But
So,
uh,
so you're telling me is we need to work together to make Lunar 3 about a prequel to all this, right?
oh,
Exactly.
I would be
There you
so
go. You
down.
got the
I'd
script
be
ready.
so down. I definitely don't, trust me. But yeah, are there any other significant differences in the PSP version that you're aware of, Noah? I'm just curious.
Enemies are less avoidable for some reason. I mean, just maybe in my own experience, uh, I kind of liked the idea that you could avoid the enemies, at least in Silver Star Story Complete. And you just, I don't know, you really can't get around anything in this game, um, because all the areas, they're very well crafted zones, but the enemies are so large and chunky in the zones that they take up most of the space. So getting around them is impossible. Um, I don't know. I will say though that it doesn't avoid the game facts getting gesture, because some of the obtuse puzzles of the original version and the previous versions are still in there. Um, there's a puzzle with like a pink balloon mob that
Oh
you have
yeah,
to
yeah.
find. That, oh my god, yeah.
That's one of the worst parts of the game.
Oh, easily one of the. I definitely remember quitting the game and watching the end of it the first time I played it. When I got to that part, but yeah, I don't. I mean, there are a couple spots though. That's not sort of the only one.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I mean, I want to talk more about the gameplay, but I'm curious before we move on to that. Let's kind of back up for a second here. Ben, I know you played Legend, which I'm guessing is probably the most different actually from a story perspective. There are any like large differences that you can remember in terms of the
Uh,
Legend version?
no, Legend is really just heavily based on the PS1 version. So, like to the point that it uses the cutscenes, but it doesn't. You can't play a cutscene on the GBA, so it just plays like a still image from the anime cutscenes of
Interesting. Okay.
PS1. Yeah. But it's no, it's like basically the PS1 version story wise. But I mean, the localization is completely different, so it comes across differently, but like the plot is the same pretty much.
That's interesting. Is Noah like a knowing, or not Noah, Nash? Sorry, Noah.
All good.
Is Nash like a knowing betrayer in that version? Because in the Silver Star, he's sort of like an accidental betrayal.
Yeah, I mean it I'm trying to remember like the specifics of that. I mean the thing too is with the localize because the localization isn't that great, the
That's fair.
character motivations don't always come off exactly the way you would want it to be intended, I think. So really nuanced stuff like that, you know, I mean I that's hard to say just
That's
because
fair.
it really is not like I don't wanna say the localization is, like, super horrible, but there are times where it's like, I don't really know what they're trying to get across.
You know what? If they somehow accidentally made Nash a better character in the Game Boy Advance version, then you know what? Impressive.
Ye
I actually, in the Silver Star, like I don't think I've talked about this. Like he doesn't actually do it on purpose. Like he's like sort of being manipulated by Galleon without realizing it. But like all the character relationships are just like so less fleshed out in that version. Like Kyle and Jessica are like they don't really have a history in the Silver Star. Not really. They kind of do. Like they knew each other, but not in the way that they do later. And I love Kyle and Jessica's interplay. Like I think
Yeah,
that
me
is
too.
like
yeah.
for me, like that's my favorite thing about these games. And maybe like 10 of the points that I took off of Silver Star Story was because like that interplay is so much weaker. But yeah, like is not a betrayer in the same way in that version. And
I
so yeah, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, I think one of the reasons they kind of changed that is because you got to remember in the Silver Star Story Complete, they added Royce and Fascia, and they kind of have him interact with Royce and Fascia a lot during that
Yeah, it's true.
version. So if those two characters don't exist in the original version of the game, then you have a character that needs to interact with these characters. So they kind of changed it that reason. I think
Mhm.
actually it kind of works for that, but I
Yeah.
still hate Nash.
Yeah, and he still, like, has those interactions in, Legend with Roy's Fascia. So I think it's, like, basically the same as Complete as far as that goes.
Yeah, I'm sure we could flesh out all of them. Like I know like some of the story beats take way longer in Silver Star as opposed to Complete, but I'm just curious about like sort of the flavor. I think we've captured that pretty well. But I Noah was talking a lot about the gameplay, and I think the gameplay is an important thing to touch on here because in a lot of ways it's very similar. When you think about something like combat, and Lunar was sort of particular on this front. Like you have your characters on one side of the screen, you have the enemies on the left side of the screen, you choose your actions, and then like you move as far as your character is able to move towards them if it's like a melee attack, or within range of whatever. And like AoE attacks are part of it. And it's still very turn based. Like the movement mechanics, I feel like in the later versions, like at least in Complete, feel sort of generic actually. Like, and one thing I'll say in the Silver Stars favor in terms of the combat is that it like the movement stat seems to really matter, like how far you can move across the screen, sort of positioning. But then like they'll make like super dumb decisions and like run around an enemy like 3 times before they go where you want them to go, and I'm like, well, that kind of defeated the purpose. But at least I appreciated they were trying with it. But my biggest problem with the combat in the Silver Star is that like Alex doesn't have any like sword master moves. It's just like he actually becomes a magic user. He becomes a member of Vane, and then he starts using magic. But like it doesn't matter because his physical attacks are still stronger than anything else. So like, and I think I said this in my review. Like on the final boss, I was like, hey, for fun, I'm just gonna hit physical attack 4 rounds in a row and just see if I win without even healing. And I did. Because the Silver Star is absurdly easy. And I know that is not true of some of the later versions.
No.
It is absurdly easy, and part of the reason it's absurdly easy is because the encounter rate is absurdly high. Like I was getting in fights like every 4 steps in these stupid dungeons where it was random encounters, and these are things that are eliminated in later versions. And so, but I'm glad that Noah brought up that in the PSP version, like it's sort of like the Chrono Trigger effect, right? It's like there's no random battles, but like, can you really avoid them? Maybe
Hmm.
not. Yeah, there are lots of other gameplay issues with the Silver Star. Like you can't even heal in towns in the Silver Star. You have to go to like these churches off in the middle of nowhere that you can't find. And like and there's fights on the overworld map in the Silver Star. So I know there are a lot of differences in the other versions. So what are some of your opinions about some of the gameplay characteristics in the later versions?
This is a working designs 101. Let's make every game harder than it needs to be because you know what? The West can take it. If you ever play the original versions of these games in Japanese, they're so much easier. Like every single version, and that just not just Lunar, but every working designs game apparently it was so much easier in Japanese. I don't know why they had to take a game and make it so much more difficult than it needed to be.
I
Was it
mean,
like,
yeah, like the fact that they made you use magic points to save in
oh
the
yeah,
Lunar 2
Yeah,
version of
Lunar, yeah,
Sega CD,
exactly.
like, oh my god.
I don't even want to talk about the Borgin fight in that game.
Oh, that
Both
game, that
the
fight is
original version's
absurd.
harder than the second version, and it's still hard. But
Yep.
like they adjust the bosses to your level in Silver Star Story Complete. So like no matter how high level you get, yeah, it becomes a little easier. No, the boss is still really hard. They still hit for like tremendous amounts of damage because all their stats are multiplied by your level, which is like absurd. So even if you have like a Game Genie, and trust me, I played this game Game Genie or the Game Genie, the Game Shark back then, I guess. Where you get to level 99. No, the enemies still hit hard for whatever reason. I don't know why it was. I don't want to say anything. I don't want to like put like working designs on the spot. I guess I could. Like I think they were just trying to sell strategy guides. Honestly, that's the way I always looked at working designs. They made really amazing games, but they made so many weird changes to gameplay that it felt like they were trying to make you buy a strategy guide. Which you know what, their strategy guides were beautiful. They were
For sure
hardbound,
were.
amazing. I lost mine at Hurricane Sandy a long time ago, but but they were trying to make a buck, I guess, because
Yeah.
even some of the puzzles in the game,
Yeah.
they in Japanese they give you hints. In this version, they don't. There's nothing there.
I think, and I've read a lot of different stories about reasons why they made those choices. Um, and yeah, I mean, like, they didn't do that in the Silver Star. The Silver Star was just stupid easy, but like you can see them doing it later, and I think it's because they were afraid of the rental market was part of it.
Oh yeah, I
Uh,
get it.
like they wanted people to like not be able to beat it in a weekend, and I'm like, this game is still long. If it, like,
I
it can
believe they
still
call
be
that
hard to do
the
that.
Lion King effect.
Oh my god.
From the Lion King. That's the story behind that game for the
No,
Super
there's a
NES, the
game
Lion
that
King.
I've never beaten.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that was at least part of it. But yeah, like some of the choices they made were absurd. But other people didn't play versions localized by Working Design. So what were your experiences with it?
Do any of your guys's I don't think this is true about the Sega CD or the PS1 version. Do you guys have the AI attack option?
They do. They
They
actually do
do.
have AI, and actually the
Even
AI
in the
is
Sega
actually
CD
not
version,
bad.
yeah.
Yep, Legend does as well. Yeah.
In
Oh,
fact, if you ever play Lunar 2, Lucia is completely AI for the entire game. You
oh,
can't control her in that version, or any
interesting.
version. She just does her AI thing. So
Interesting.
it's actually kind of a smart AI for 1992 and 1998.
Yeah, I found myself using that quite a lot later on in Silver Star Harmony, um, and really enjoyed that honestly. So yeah,
Yeah, I mean, Legend is pretty significantly mechanically different than the other versions. At the beginning, Zach, you were talking about how, your characters move and they have to get into position to then like attack and everything. So all that is gone in Legend. It's a straight up traditional turn-based system where you have the enemies are on the left side of the screen and your character's on the right, and that's it. It's like Final Fantasy 1, 2, and 3. There's no moving around or anything like that. Which in some sense is a little more approachable. I think probably part of why they made that change was because the screen real estate on the Game Boy Advance is so much smaller. So it didn't really make a lot of sense to have the characters like moving around because the battlefields are smaller. And also the sprites are so much larger on the Game Boy Advance version.
Yeah, that
But
was
it
kept in Silver Star Harmony as well.
oh, in
The
the PSP
position
version
doesn't.
as well?
Yeah, it doesn't really
Mm,
matter. I mean, like there's certain enemies you can't hit with certain attacks, but it doesn't matter where your character's position, even though they will change position a little bit. Um,
I see.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, and in Legend, they don't move at all, and I do think that's a pretty significant, change, like, it makes the battles a lot less dynamic, in Legend, and, like, to make up for that, they added what's essentially like a limit break. I think they call it, like, the arts system, but there's, like they have a little bar underneath their, like, health and MP, and then it fills up from normal attacks, and then you can do, like, a big attack or whatever, and each character has a different one. And that's like sort of interesting, but they mostly boil down to being like attacks that hit all the enemies. So they all kind of have the same effect. There's a few that are different, but for the most part, that's what they are. And most of the characters get like attacks that hit all or most of the enemies anyway. So it doesn't end up being really that useful later in the game. But yeah, I thought that was a pretty significant change and not really for the better, but I can understand why they made it due to the limitations of the platform.
yeah.
That's also
Does
in I was about to say that's also in the PSP version, right? The limit break? I don't
Yeah.
remember.
Yeah, and I actually been did is Lunar Legend, would you say it's, like, difficult maybe? Have you played any other ones, and do you think it's
Oh,
difficult compares
yeah, so I've played
comparatively?
Complete on PS1 and this game is so much easier than Complete. And I would say the main reason is that they made it so you can save anywhere in Lunar Legend, which I don't remember if that was the case in Complete or not.
Yeah, you can save anywhere and complete,
Okay.
which was kinda nice
Um
for 1999.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, and it's super nice because on GB, for a portable game, it's super
Oh,
nice.
yeah.
But it refills your health and mana or MP for all your characters every time you resume a save.
Oh, that's super nice. I
Yeah.
don't remember that
That
Nice.
changes things dramatically.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So that makes the game so much easier. So I mean, there were points where like I forgot that like a boss battle was going to come up, so I didn't like save and then reload and heal everybody real quick. But you can pretty much do it whenever you want. So that does kind of like neuter the difficulty pretty significantly. Um, and it's convenient, but at the same time, it is kind of a detriment because once you start, you can't help but like abuse it. So,
I feel like the difficulty in Harmony is definitely not very. I mean, it's not high. It's pretty easy. I think it maybe hits the best of both worlds in this sense, in that it's not so easy that, you know, I don't know, some of the areas just become ridiculous and redundant. But it's also not so hard that like every boss is, an hour or two excursion. Um, but I think that the difficulty in Lunar is a really interesting thing. I think that Lunar being an easy game is part of its identity and part of its charm. I think that it's a game that's like extremely palatable in almost every sense, in the sense that it has like really lovable characters, a palatable, not like crazy evil villain. The story is really legible. And having bosses and encounters be a little bit easy comparatively to maybe like Final Fantasy IV or something, I is part of what sets it apart, um, and makes it more of that like Saturday morning video game, that like rainy day RPG, that I think that it kind of is. So
Yeah,
I
I
totally
think
agree.
I think they definitely wanted to make it approachable, and I think especially with Legend, like because it's on the Game Boy Advance, and the audience for Game Boy Advance was definitely skewed a little younger. I think that's part of why they made those changes. And I don't. It being easy isn't really too much of an issue. It doesn't really bother me that much because I don't think that's really what you play it for. But um, you know, it, it's just different, and it's different than what I was used to with Complete.
Yeah.
Can I ask a
Now,
question real quick? I'm sorry.
go ahead.
I can't remember if the other versions have limited inventory.
Uh, Silver Star certainly does.
I know Silver Star does. So is Silver Star Story Complete, but did the Legends? I can't remember if Legends of Harmony have limited inventory like those two games.
I don't think
Um,
so.
I never ran into that as a problem.
You don't have to switch your items to the characters themselves to use them in combat, right?
Not that I
No,
remember.
Okay, yeah.
no.
That's
There's a
another problem.
party-wide inventory for
Okay,
yeah,
yeah, that's one of the issues with Silver Star Story Complete is the fact that you need to put the items on the
Yeah.
characters to use them.
yeah. That's
And
true.
the worst part is like even Alex like has to have his ocarina on him at all times because of
Yep.
a bug in the game. This is an interesting little story, by the way. Um, so he actually only has like 4 slots compared to everyone else's like 5. Well, they make 6 actually, because of a bug that happened in the original demo of the game, where you could take Alex's ocarina out of his inventory, and then you actually couldn't complete the game because if you
Wow.
go to because you have to play the
Yeah,
ocarina
because
at the
you
very
need it.
you need
Yeah.
to play the ocarina at the very last second of the game, right? In order to win. And if it's not in his inventory, Null isn't with you, so you can't play the ocarina and you lose. So
Whoopsie.
they fixed that in the actual final release. But if you played the demo and then use the save file from the demo to there, you still can move it. Weird.
That's amazing. I
That's
think I'd
very
heard that
interesting.
story at some point before, but I forgot, and I'm glad I heard it again. So that's great. And I agree with everything you guys are saying about like the difficulty, and I do think that I don't remember Silver Star Story Complete that well in terms of the difficulty. But I guess maybe having been raised on like NES RPGs, I was like, oh, this isn't so bad.
It's not really all that bad because you can save anywhere.
Yeah,
It's like and if after you get to know it a little bit, it's not like super difficult. It's just kind of annoying, I guess, more than anything else.
yeah, I can see that. But I think that the Silver Star, which I'm guessing is actually probably the easiest of these 4 versions, but not for fun reasons. Like I agree with all those things, but like first of all, the Silver Star I don't think has like the look or the charm of some of the later versions. So like because it's so brown and drab and doesn't feel as cheery, like it doesn't give the same vibe to some degree. But more importantly, like it's easy because like I've done a bajillion battles on my way to it. And so like I grind it up, but I didn't want to grind up. I just had to because like those are the enemies that were in my way. And so like I think it sounds to me and everything you keep saying, Noah, I'm like, oh gosh, I need to play the PSP version. I need to play the PSP version. Like that sounds like my jam.
You
Um,
should.
and
It's
so like
good.
yeah, it sounds great to me. Yeah, but one of the things that I am almost certain I will not like in the PSP version, and I probably will actually, is the adjustment in the voice acting and the cutscenes. There's no John Truitt in your version.
You have to have John Truitt as
No John
Galleon.
Truitt as
I'm
Galleon is
sorry, I can't.
immediately
Magic Emperor
yeah,
Galleon.
yeah,
All
thank
right,
you.
because
Yeah, you got it right,
that line
yeah.
alone, not Galleon, dear Quark. Magic Emperor is so good. He is. I I question this all the time. I think I saw an interview with him. Someone did an interview with him not that long
It
ago.
was pretty
Like
recent. Yeah, I saw this too, yeah.
he could have been a really big voice actor, and I
Mhm.
don't know why he never wanted to do anything outside of things he did with Victor Ireland and like working designs. I think he
Yeah,
did some work Gaijin Works too.
He was in Popful Mail, I think, as
Yeah,
Oh
well.
yeah.
it was like he could have been a really big voice actor because he was really good.
Yeah, he's fantastic. I mean, like, he feels like, not to embarrass myself, but maybe I had some screen names in the early 2000s, late 90s that involved Galleon, but he's what sort of makes that character for me. And I think that the cheesiness of the rest of the voice acting, and it's funny if you listen to some of the outtakes or bloopers, you're like, really, you want me to do that like that cheesy? Really, that's what you want me to do? And I'm like, yes, that's exactly what we wanted you to do. That sounded awesome. Like it's so insanely stupid that it's cool. So like I don't know the voice acting, especially at least in the PSP version. I think Troy Baker, if I'm not mistaken, it actually voices Galleon in the PSP version at least, which is fascinating. Um, but yeah, I like what are people's thoughts on like adjustments to like some of the presentation stuff and the voice acting and the graphics and things like that?
People do not like the Silver Star Harmony. What's the name of the song? Wind's Nocturne
Yeah, the boat
for
song.
some reason, but I think that it's the best version. I mean, I don't know. I've
I
listened to
think that
the PS1 version. It's good.
I think
Don't
the
get me
reason
wrong.
because of that is absolute nostalgia. For me, like I can actually play that entire song in my head. Like I've heard that song so many times in my head just playing these games, like, playing that game, like, a ton of times that, like, that's the song to me.
Yeah, fair enough.
It's like someone doing like, a remix or a remake of the song, like, that's not the song. And they just changed the lyrics that, "No, that's not the lyrics of that song." And that's what I think that comes down to, and that's the reason why no one likes that version, in my opinion.
That's fair. It
It
must
it
have been
probably sounds a lot
jarring.
better. Yeah, it probably sounds a lot better because it's probably better audio mixed and, not the voice actress that sang that both those songs, the opening song and that one, and I think she also sings the songs in Lunar too. She's really great, but I don't know who sings it in, harmony, actually, but it just doesn't sound right, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't know. It sounds right to me because all of my nostalgia is centered around the PSP version.
Yeah.
Because that's the one that I mostly played the first time. Um, but I think it's fine. I mean, if somebody's going to go into it for the first time, uh, you probably won't have any issues with the PSP's voice acting. Null's a little grating, but he's a little grating in every version of this game. So, uh, I mean, there's that. But yeah, I don't know. I like the voice acting, but I have played Silver Star Story Complete and will agree that the villains, are better. Alex is also in the PSP version. Is I don't know. There are some issues that I have certainly, but I think if a person's playing these games the first time, I don't think that it will matter that much. I don't know. What are you guys' thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't think it would matter too much if you played the first time, especially since, the only version that a lot of people have access to is probably Harmony. They're, you know, trying to get the game legit because that's probably the easiest version to get because trying to get the original versions of these games are very expensive.
I mean, I think
Um,
that the one
so
on the phone is based
oh,
on
Touch, yeah, Touch. I forgot about Touch.
but I don't think the voice acting is Working Design's voice acting. I should have looked this up
I don't
before
know.
we
I've
started
never actually
recording
played the
because
Touch
I'm an
version.
idiot. I didn't look it up, but I'm sure some listener will will message in. But I'm 90% sure that they adjusted the script at least a little bit in the Touch version, and I'm 99% sure that the voice acting is different in the Touch version as well. I think they might be using the PSP voice acting in the Touch version.
I think you can still buy the PSP version on the PlayStation Store as well.
That's cool.
I think. I mean, it might have been part of the PSP closure. I mean, that's the version I have on PS Vita. Um, I think you can. That's not verified, but I think you can.
Do they even have any voice acting in the Legend version?
Yeah, so presentation for Legend is kind of interesting because in some ways I think it's like the best version. And then in other ways, like mostly the audio, it's by far the worst. Like um there's very little voice acting. Like there's a couple voice clips in certain scenes or in battle occasionally, but they're super crunchy because it's the GBA, right? And it's not like it's like they're trying to play like sound samples, which just does not ever sound good on the GBA. Like they're taken from another source, like clearly I think from Complete. And it's they sound awful, and the music is also just not great. Like they do like any time where Luna is singing, like they won't do like the lyrical song, but they'll do like the la la la, that kind of stuff, and it just sounds awful. And it just, I mean, part of it's because I've played Complete, but listening to the music in the GBA version, it's such a like bad facsimile of the music in Complete that that aspect of the game is definitely like a very bad. Um, but the visuals are really really good in Legend, and I think are like the strongest part of the game, and I think are like it's like the best looking version of Lunar in my opinion, because they have like much bigger sprites. So like in Complete and in the original version on the Sega CD, you have these really squat, like short little character sprites, right? And you can barely make out their faces, and they're just like more of like a really like a silhouette. And the GBA version has like much bigger sprites with more frames of animation, and the animations just in general are much more detailed. So there's like a lot of personality that's conveyed through the animations in Legend that I don't think you get, at least in the earlier versions. I'm not comparing it to the PSP version because I know that has like completely redone visuals.
Yeah.
But
I
I
like
really
the
like the look of
I
Legend.
agree, actually, Ben. I love the GBA's chunky sprites. And you're right, they do have a lot of personality. And while I think harmonies are a little better just because I have a lot of nostalgia around that like Suikoden 2 Chrono Trigger look,
Mhm.
which is I think what Silver Star Harmony was going for. I also sort of like the big head, like little guy version that's maybe more Final Fantasy esque. Um, so I agree.
Yeah,
So,
like
oh,
the characters, like the battle animations in particular are like really good. Like each character has really unique combat animations for like every single skill and when they're normal attacks and when they're attacking without weapons. Like that's something I noticed when you're in the dungeon or the tower in Vane early on, and you're not allowed to bring weapons into there, right? And so then you get to see all the characters attack when they don't have weapons, and they have completely different animations than when they do have weapons equipped. And like Nash like wind up his fist like a lot before punching. It's like it just there's so much charm in those animations.
That is a fun thing that I did not know.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Legend gets sort of dumped on a lot by people in the Lunar community, but like something like as simple as that can definitely add a lot of charm and personality to a game.
So
Uh,
I had a well,
Go ahead.
I had to go look this up because I was actually really curious. Who sings the boat song and the opening song in Harmony is the same person that actually sings it in Lunar's Silver Star Story Complete. They actually brought her back. Jennifer Stiggle, I think that's her name. They actually did bring her back to actually sing that
That's
song
awesome.
in Harmony. I was curious who actually sung the song in Harmony, but it's actually her.
Oh yeah, I think the contingency is that she sounds older and doesn't sound like a 15-year-old
Probably. I mean,
anymore.
Right.
it's
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, she
2010
was
compared to the
older.
1999.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense. Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. So I think that we've covered most of what I was thinking in terms of the differences. I know that there was like an epilogue in at least a brief epilogue in Silver Star Story Complete where you can go around and talk to people. That's not in the Silver Star. Is there is an epilogue in the other two versions as well? Is that accurate?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Is there anything to those epilogues?
Not. I mean, nothing that I think is different.
I don't think
That
You
different,
just go around
really.
and talk to people,
it's just
essentially.
that you're in Maribia, right? And you go around and
Yeah.
talk to everybody, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're the
Yeah.
same then.
It's the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just another difference. So I guess are there any other like differences or things that make your version special that you wanted to bring up before I get to my final question?
Pacing, maybe. I think
Okay.
at least between the Sega CD version is man, that is a slow game.
Whew, yeah, it
That
is.
is a
You ain't
slow
kidding.
burn of a video game. Uh, but maybe on purpose. I don't know. Who knows? Who knows what these older game designers were thinking, um, with in terms of value for your dollar. Um,
I mean, the
but
game's still not that long, so
yeah,
yeah.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
you can shred through Harmony in like 15 hours if you really
Oh,
put
okay.
your head down. Um, and I think that's to its benefit. I mean, I think the case is the same with at least Legend, but the
Yeah.
PS1 version also probably is a little faster, at least.
I think it is. It's just that like I played it so many times that like I can't really comment on the pacing because I know exactly what to do. It's like I know exactly where to go, so it's not like I'm like lost or any time. I played it like a shit ton of times, so it's like I know exactly what to do, know exactly where to go. I'm not worried about like anything like that, so I can't really comment on the pacing. It's like it probably is faster, but I'm not 100% sure if it's like either slower or faster than the other version. Honestly,
Yeah, Legend is significantly faster in pace, mostly because the world map, like it's just points that you select rather than like actually moving around on it. So that makes things a little bit faster.
Yeah.
But you do have random encounters in Legend. and they're not like visible on the map. So that can make it feel a little slower, even though I think the runtime is definitely shorter than complete.
Yeah, I mean there is a world map in the Silver Star, and there are random encounters on the world map. And while the rate isn't quite as high as it is in dungeons on the world map, which I think is an interesting sort of programming decision, it's still enough that like it's frustrating and you can't figure out where you're going. And I got lost like a bunch of times because there's no like mini map or anything, right? Because it's 1992. So yeah, I definitely like I played most of the Silver Star in like 3 or 4 days because like even despite my criticisms, and I've leveled most of them on this podcast, like it's still just like kind of it sucked me in. Like I love these characters in this world so much that even if it's a lesser version, like I'm pushing through. But yeah, the pacing is definitely an issue in the Silver Star. So yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up, Noah. So I guess I'll ask my last question, based on the ones that you've played so far. And I know that not most of us haven't played all of them. What's your favorite version of Lunar, the Silver Star, or Silver Star Story Complete?
I think my favorite version is still Silver Star Story Complete, and I played all of them except Touch. I've never actually played Touch. Now you brought it up, um, but I think it's just, and we talked about it before. I think it's maybe nostalgia for me. I mean, it's a hell of a drug. It really is. Nostalgia is amazing. When you want to like just remember things in the past, and it's like, um, I can't pick. I mean, I really actually I'm one of those people that actually really like Harmony. I think Harmony is a great game actually still. And if you have no other way to play uh Lunar, you should definitely play Harmony. But for me it'll always be like Silver Star Story Complete just because of nostalgia reasons.
I'm gonna have to go with Lunar Walking School for the Sega Game Gear.
I actually
I'm still waiting for a
may have
translation for that game.
tried to play that just without a localization, and it did not go very well.
Oh yeah,
I've heard good
yeah.
things though. I've
Yeah,
heard good
I have
things
too.
about it.
Better than the game that will not be named for the DS.
Yes,
So
that
yeah.
doesn't exist.
Oh yeah, yeah. It has a remake on Sega Saturn, I think, too. Um,
Walking School.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think that's
It
I think
does.
that's the version that people have tried to translate, but every time they do, it's like someone
Uh,
just drops it.
the Saturn is a tough system
Yeah.
to emulate for too.
Sorry, yeah, that's just some obscure Lunar drops here. I think I might. I think it depends on who you are. I think if you're a person who has a lot of nostalgia for the Super Nintendo, uh, and the PS1 era of gaming, early PS1, I guess. Uh, Lunar Silver Star Story Complete, I think, is probably going to be the definitive version. Maybe pick up an undub. Um, you could just Google undub Lunar Silver Star Story Complete. And that's all I'll say about that. Because that might those like a ROM hack of that might have the difficulty toned down a little bit. But I think if you have nostalgia for maybe late PS1 era, or you're just perhaps a younger person who doesn't really have that much of a tie to that era and you want to play this charming Saturday morning video game, I would pick up Harmony. I think Harmony is the most approachable. It's certainly the most accessible in terms of purchasing it nowadays, but
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say complete is the version I think is better, having only played complete and legend. But um, Scott, you were talking about having so much nostalgia for complete, and it was crazy because playing legend, I just got so much nostalgia, not for this version of the game, which I hadn't played before, but for Game Boy Advance RPGs in general. Like it just took me back to being a kid and um, playing all the Game Boy Advance RPGs that I love. So I think if you have that kind of nostalgia for the Game Boy Advance, then you probably will get something out of playing Lunar Legend. Um, Especially because I think like because it's as a conversion of a PlayStation game to the Game Boy Advance, like it's pretty impressive despite all of the flaws. But I think if you're just going to emulate and you want to play the best version, definitely go with complete.
Yeah, I'm not going to give any sort of love to Silver Star. Everybody else is like, oh, my version has some things that are good about it. I'm like,
yeah.
nope, Do not play the version that I reviewed. Uh, I mean,
There's a
like,
reason why you gave it that score.
yeah, I mean, like, as I said in my review, it's a history lesson, and you know what? If you loved it in '92, then you're probably still gonna love it now. But
Yeah.
it the other 3 versions from everything I've heard, including Legend, are superior. Like, it's just a better way to experience a great game. Now, did I still enjoy Silver Star? Sure. But it's just not it's not what the other versions are. Like, literally the only thing that is good about it comparatively is the soundtrack. And the soundtrack's only, like, again, 30 minutes of tracks long because it's like a CD, right? So I liked it, I enjoyed it, but, like, for me, and again, I've only dabbled in Legend, got a few hours into it, I think. Um, for me, complete nostalgia and all is the version that I recommend, especially because it's got that little spicy working design localization when they've really like decided to just go like hard on what they wanted to be, because to me that is the flavor that is Lunar. But yeah, I think that you can't go wrong with any of the 3 later versions. It sounds like, I mean, it sounds like Legend, I think, maybe has some issues, but I will say that you have convinced me that I need to play Harmony, Noah, so I appreciate that.
Yeah,
I
it's
think
great. It's
oh,
my favorite version still.
I
Um,
think the best thing about Silver Star is the really campy opening theme, though.
Oh, okay, yeah. I'm
It
sorry I
is
didn't call that out.
it
It's
is really
phenomenal.
over the top and campy.
It's so
I
good, and
mean,
it's
I
like a
like the
full
opening to the original, sorry,
I
but, like, that one's good.
I wonder how much of the CD, like, data capacity was taken up by just that
Had to
opening
be a lot of
cutscene.
it.
It's gotta be a ton of
mhm.
it because it's like a full-blown cutscene with, like, more cutscenes than the whole rest of the game has. It's awesome. So it's like a little Tales of Fantasia way before Tales of Fantasia came out on that front. Um, so yeah, thank you all so much for coming in and chatting with me about Lunar. I'm excited to see the 2 reviews that are still to go up, as of this when this recording is going to drop, which is very soon from after the recording. Um, and yeah, I enjoyed revisiting it. I enjoyed talking about one of my favorite game series, and it's such a critical game in the history of the genre, but also obviously to us as a site. And it's one of the reasons I'm here. So I think that's exciting. So let's talk a little bit about what's coming up. Next week, this is an episode that's actually already recorded, and I was on it. It was super fun. Is the 2023 year in review? Ever since Retro Encounter has started, we've been doing year in review episodes where we talk about the games that we played that year, some of our favorite experiences on Retro Encounter itself, and I thought it was a great time. So look forward to listening to that next week. And then after that, our game journal for January, and I actually can't remember if this has been announced yet, is Moon. The what's it called? The anti RPG. I can't remember the official title of
Yeah.
it. But it's that miraculously localized, sort of independent ish anti RPG. That do you say it Luck to Luck? Is that how you say the name of the
Love
developer?
Delic.
Okay. So that's going to be what we're going to be talking about in January. I know Ben's going to be on those episodes as well,
Yep.
and I haven't started spinning it up yet, but I am super excited to play Moon. I've been wanting to play it since it finally got localized.
Yeah, that's a
Um,
rare, non-controversial localization there. A perfect translation,
if it
maybe,
wasn't
as some
what's
might
his
call it.
name,
Tim Rogers.
Tim
Tim
Rogers
Rogers.
involved
Yep.
with localization.
Yeah.
That's that guy. He's amazing. Um, And we'll also in January have episode 400, which I will be on. I don't actually know what it's going to be. Slowcy's told us, but like it's one of those gimmick episodes from Slowcy, and he does an amazing job with it. And while I don't really understand the concept, I'm excited because he does a great job with them. And I'll let him talk about what's coming up after that. So if you want to get in touch with us, you can email retro at rpgfan.com. Slowcy checks that a couple times a week. You can also find us on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, on Discord, on YouTube. Scott, who's with us today, streams on Twitch almost every
Yep, yep,
day.
yep.
He's a machine. He does an amazing job, does a great job with the community. You should come join us. We also have an RPG fan shop, and I can also say this today as well. So we've been selling things through we're selling t-shirts and mugs and things like that, and you can check that out on our site. But also, this is very recently announced. We have our RPG fan review card book that just dropped with with 300 pages of RPG fan review cards. Looks sort of like a magazine with review cards that were originally designed by Steph. who anybody who's seen her work knows that she is an amazing artist. And she did incredible work on doing those on Instagram, and
It
got the
is
opportunity.
the
Go ahead.
Sears catalog of role playing
Yeah.
games.
And we got the opportunity to publish it with this company, and I already have 2 pre-publication copies of it sitting on my shelf. I'm looking at them right now, and I'll be buying a post-publication copy of it very soon here, because it's awesome, not just to see my own words in print, but also because it just looks so cool. Seriously, go check it out. It is absolutely worth it. And if you love magazines in the 90s for video games, you're going to love this. We also have 2 other fine podcasts, both post on Mondays usually. One is Random Encounter, hosted by John O'Logan, usually about current events. And we also have Rhythm Encounter, which is about RPG music, usually hosted by Mike Salvato. You can review us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify. We love feedback. 5-star variety is the best kind, of course. And before we sign off, let's let everybody know where to find us. So, Noah, what's the best way to contact you?
You can find me at Noah K on Blue Sky, and Noapolitan pretty much anywhere else, like the ice cream Neapolitan, but Noah.
Perfect.
It's cute.
And I like it.
Thank you.
And Scott, what's the best way to contact you?
You can contact me on our Discord, because that's probably the only social media platform I actually use anymore. Or you
Good
can
for
just
you.
find us on Twitch. You can talk to me on Twitch. Talk to me almost every day. I'm there. I'll answer all questions. We could talk about Lunar.
Awesome. And Ben, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
You can email me at benloganlove@gmail.com.
And if you want to get in touch with me, the best way is email, zachw@rpgfan.com. And you can also find me on RPG Fans Discord as ZachW. And yeah, again, thanks, the 3 of you, for coming on to talk about one of my all-time favorite games. No matter, even if people think that I don't love it, I really do love Lunar. And it was a blast to just talk about the differences and like the little tweaks that were made between the 4 versions here.
It absolutely was a blast. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, it was
And
such a blast.
I want Lunar 3.
3. Come on, Lunar
I
3.
hold out hope. I don't believe Victor Ireland ever saw that game like he claims he did, but I hold out hope every year.
You know, you could actually look at some really interesting history of Victor Ireland's interactions with LunarNET and RPGFan. Like, he had some serious beef with us in the early days.
Of course he
did. he was a dude. He still is a dude. I guess he's still alive. Anyway, thank you, listeners. Good night and good luck.